She didn't knock before stepping into my room, she never did, but this time, she paused at the door like she was crossing into something neither of us could step back from. I'd heard people whisper about her since I was a kid in this house, Callista, the woman who had been here longer than most of the furniture. Mid-40s, quiet, composed, one of those women who didn't ask for attention but drew it in anyway. She carried herself like someone born from secrets. I'd been back home from university for only 2 weeks, and somehow, I'd found more excuses to be near her than anyone else here. Fixing the lock on the linen closet. Asking about the garden. Offering help with groceries even though she could carry twice my weight if she wanted. She entered with a folded stack of fresh sheets in her arms, her sleeves pushed up, a faint trace of jasmine following her in. I pretended to be occupied, leaning over my desk, but my focus had been tracking her footsteps long before she appeared. "Your mother said you needed these," she said, her voice low, soft without trying. She didn't look at me right away. I stood, reaching out to take them. My hand brushed hers, barely a second, barely a touch. But she froze just enough that I noticed. Her skin was warm. Softer than I expected from someone who spent her days working with her hands. "That's fine," I said, even though it meant nothing. She looked at me then. Properly looked. Not with the polite distance she used with my father. Not with the mild sternness she used with guests. There was something else, something she kept carefully tucked behind dark eyes. "You don't need to pretend to be busy when I come in," she said, her gaze flicking from the desk to my face. "I've known you since you were tall enough to steal fruit from the pantry." I huffed a laugh. "I don't do that anymore." "I didn't say you stopped," she replied, and the corner of her mouth almost lifted. She stepped past me to set the sheets on the bed. As she leaned, the scent of her hair, something soft and clean and feminine, drifted up. I didn't move. I couldn't. My pulse kicked up like it was betraying me on purpose. Her hand smoothed the top sheet once, twice. A simple task she'd done 1,000 times, but today her fingers hesitated, barely pressing into the fabric. Like she was thinking about something else. Or someone. "Is everything okay?" I asked. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she straightened, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, a small gesture that revealed the slightest tremor in her hand. "I'm fine," she said, but it sounded like a lie someone had practiced too often. The quiet stretched, too aware, too full. The air between us felt warmer than the room should have allowed. Her eyes lingered too long before shifting away. Mine did the same. "You've been different lately," I said before I could swallow the thought. That made her glance back at me, sharply at first, then softer. "You notice too much. Maybe you try too hard to hide." A pause. Heavy. But not uncomfortable, just dangerous in a way I couldn't name. She took a slow breath, like she was about to say something she shouldn't. Instead, she stepped closer, not by much, but enough that I could feel the heat of her body. My arm brushed hers as she adjusted the corner of the blanket even though it was already straight. This time, she didn't pull away quickly. "Don't tell anyone," she said quietly, her voice almost a breath. "About what?" I asked. Her eyes met mine, and the silence between us said more than either of us was ready to speak aloud. Before she could answer, footsteps echoed faintly down the hallway, approaching. She turned toward the door but didn't move away from me. Someone was coming. And she still hadn't stepped back. The footsteps passed the door without stopping, fading down the hall until there was nothing left but the hush they'd both forgotten how to breathe in. Callista didn't move at first. Her hand was still resting against the blanket she'd pretended to straighten, her shoulder just a breath from mine. Only when the quiet settled again did she step back, not far, just enough to remind herself of a line she kept trying to redraw. "I should finish the rooms upstairs," she murmured, though she didn't turn toward the door yet. I nodded, but my eyes were still on her. "You always say that when you want to leave before you're ready." That made her glance at me again. Not annoyed. Not amused. Just, seen. Like no one had spoken to her that honestly in a long time. She crossed her arms lightly, not defensive, more like she was holding herself in place. The sleeves of her shirt slid just enough to show a faded scar along her wrist, one I'd never noticed before. It told more of a story than she would ever volunteer. "You were a kid when I started here," she said, her tone controlled, but softer than before. "I've spent half my life in other people's houses, appearing when needed and disappearing the rest of the time. It's easier that way." "Easier doesn't mean better," I said quietly. Her gaze flicked to mine, then down again. Even that small acknowledgement felt like something private. I'd heard bits about her over the years. A husband she left. No children. A mother she cared for until the end. Neighbors who said she worked too much. Men who said she was too proud. I never believed any of them understood her. She reached for the laundry basket she'd left by the door, but I stepped closer, touching her hand just long enough to stop her. My thumb grazed her knuckles. It wasn't planned, and I didn't apologize. She didn't pull away, but she did go still. "It's not just about what's easier," she said, her voice low. "It's about what people talk about when they think you can't hear." That was the first time she'd said it aloud, the thing we were both pretending not to think about. The age. The house. The unspoken rules of how she was supposed to fit into my family's world. How I was supposed to see her. I leaned back against the desk, giving her a little more room but not enough distance to break whatever was holding us there. "People always talk," I said. "They just choose different targets depending on what makes them uncomfortable." She exhaled through her nose, almost a laugh but not quite. "You're too young to be this cynical. And you're too used to hiding behind other people's expectations," I said. Her eyes lifted slowly, meeting mine again. There was something fragile beneath the composure, loneliness she didn't name, maybe, or the weight of being wanted in a way she wasn't sure she was allowed to feel. She moved past me to the window, setting the basket on the chair. As she reached to close the curtain, her arm brushed mine. Not accidental, just slow, undecided. "When was the last time someone asked what you wanted?" I asked. She didn't answer. Instead, she let the curtain fall back into place and stood there with her back partially turned to me. I stepped closer, not touching her, just enough so that my words reached her without needing volume. "You don't have to tell me," I said. "But don't pretend I don't notice." A long silence followed. Then, without looking at me, she reached behind herself and rested her hand lightly against my forearm, just for a second. It was nothing. It was everything. When she let go, she still didn't step away. She didn't move, and I didn't either. The air between us felt like something we'd both agreed not to name, but neither of us was walking out of it. Her hand had just left my arm, but the warmth stayed like a mark. She stood facing the window, the curtain still trembling slightly from where she'd let it fall. The silence should have felt wrong, but it didn't. It felt dangerous in a way I couldn't step back from. I took a breath. "Callista," before I could say more, footsteps sounded again. Closer this time. More deliberate. Her head snapped toward the door. This time she stepped back from me, not dramatically, not guilt-ridden, but fast enough to show she'd thought about being seen here, alone with me, more than once. The doorknob didn't turn, but someone paused outside. A brief shadow under the door, then my mother's voice, muffled, passing by. Callista exhaled like she'd been holding that breath too long. "She doesn't come down this hall during the day," I said, quietly. "She does when someone tells her the guest towels weren't folded right," she replied, but her voice was softer than her words. I watched her tuck a loose strand of hair behind her ear, only to have it fall right back. She didn't fix it again. She was still facing the door like it could swing open any second. "You're shaking." I didn't mean to say it. It just came out. Her eyes flicked to me. "No, I'm not." She was. Barely, but enough. A tremor in the way she held her arm close to her side, the way her fingers smoothed the edge of her shirt twice instead of once. I stepped closer, slow enough she could move if she wanted. She didn't. You don't have to be afraid of being near me, I said. I'm not, she replied. Not convincing. Silence again. Not empty, full of all the words she'd rather swallow than risk. I reached out, brushing a thumb along her hand, not grabbing, not asking, just testing a boundary I already knew was there. She didn't look down, but her fingers twitched like her body betrayed her before permission. Someone could have walked in, she murmured. You don't understand what that means. I do, I said. Maybe not the way you do, but I'm not blind. Her eyes met mine then, and something wavered. The pull between us wasn't loud, but it was relentless. She didn't step back this time. And I didn't pretend not to notice the way her gaze dropped briefly to my mouth before she pulled it back up. Her breath brushed against me when she spoke next. You don't know what people assume. What they decide when they see something they shouldn't. I leaned in, not enough to touch, but close enough that one more inch would have been too much. Let them assume. She let out a small, unsteady laugh that didn't reach her eyes. Easy to say when you're not the one they'll blame. My hand lifted before I knew why. I barely touched her jaw, just a skim of contact, a question whispered through skin. She closed her eyes for half a second. Half a heartbeat. Then opened them again before either of us made the next mistake. She didn't step forward. I didn't step back. Then, her phone buzzed. The sound jolted her, like someone had thrown cold water on the moment. She pulled it from her pocket with a breath that broke whatever spell had settled around us. A message lit the screen. She didn't show me. But the way her jaw tightened said enough. Is everything okay? I asked. She didn't answer immediately. Then, quietly, we shouldn't be in here. But she didn't move to leave. Not yet. I didn't block the door. I didn't reach for her again. Still, when she finally looked up at me, the space between us felt smaller than it had ever been. And neither of us pretended otherwise. She stared at the message on her phone long enough that I started to wonder if she'd forgotten I was there. The glow from the screen lit her face, made her eyes look darker. Then, like she'd felt my gaze, she clicked the screen off without answering whoever it was. You're not leaving, I said quietly. She should have. She knew it. I knew it. But she just slipped the phone back into her pocket and lifted her chin like she wasn't about to run. I don't have to explain myself, she replied, and her voice didn't match the tremor in her hands. No, I said, stepping closer, slow enough she didn't flinch. But you stay every time you tell yourself to go. So maybe you do owe yourself an explanation. She shook her head once, sharp, like she could cut the thought in half before it formed. You don't get it. Then tell me, I said. Instead of pretending I'm imagining this. Her breath hitched. Just barely. But it was enough. I reached up, and before she could turn away, I brushed my fingers along her cheek, catching that same strand of hair that wouldn't stay tucked. I swept it away from her face, slow, feeling the heat of her skin against my knuckles. She closed her eyes for a fraction of a second, like the touch was both too much and not enough. This is wrong, she whispered. You keep saying that, I murmured, my voice closer to her ear now, but you're still here. She opened her eyes and looked at me like I was the only problem she'd never learned how to solve. Her lips parted, but nothing came out. The silence was louder than any argument could have been. It's not just me, she said finally. Then who? I asked. She hesitated, then, your mother. The people in this house. The town. My reputation. Your age. Take your pick. She listed them like she was building a barrier brick by brick, but her body didn't move away from mine. You think I haven't thought about all of that? I said. She huffed a breath, almost a laugh, almost a collapse. You think about it differently. You think consequences are theoretical. I've lived them. I'm not some kid who doesn't know what he wants. My voice was low. Too low. I know exactly what this is. She backed up a single step, but I followed without touching her. The space between us didn't change. You don't, she said, but her throat moved like she was swallowing the truth instead of speaking it. Then something in her broke, quietly, invisibly, but it was there. Her voice dropped, ragged. You make it harder to pretend I don't feel anything. The confession landed between us like a strike. I didn't speak. I didn't push. I just stepped close enough that her breath brushed my collarbone. She didn't retreat. Her hand lifted without thought, fingers grazing my arm, then stopping halfway, hovering like touching me would turn thought into fact. I can't want this, she said, barely sound. I shouldn't. But you do. I didn't make it a question. Her fingers finally settled on my sleeve. Just that, barely any pressure. But my pulse kicked hard enough that I knew she felt it. The air thickened. She looked at my mouth. I leaned in. Not enough to take. Just enough to wait and see if she'd meet me halfway. Her breath trembled. And then, footsteps again. Closer. Distinct. She froze. The doorknob clicked. And we were out of time. The doorknob didn't fully turn, just a quick rattle, like someone tested it, then walked away. We stood frozen in the stillness that followed, not breathing, not moving, listening to footsteps fade down the hallway. When it was quiet again, she didn't look at me. She stepped back like she'd just walked through fire and realized it too late. I have to go, she said, but the words came out thin, like she didn't believe them. She turned toward the door and reached for the handle, but paused with her fingers resting on the metal. I saw the tremor in her knuckles before she hid her hand in the fold of her sweater. Who was that? I asked. She didn't turn around. Does it matter? It does if they heard something. Or saw. She breathed out slowly. They didn't. But there was no conviction behind it, only hope. When she finally looked back, her eyes were darker, guarded, not with anger but with calculation, like she was mapping out every consequence at once. I took a step toward her. She stayed still. You're shaking, I said quietly. No, I'm not. But she was. Not all over, just in small betrayals, the shift of her fingers, the subtle strain at her throat, the faint tremble at the corner of her mouth. I shouldn't have stayed, she said. And yet, every time you try to leave, you don't go. Her jaw tightened. Don't make this into something intentional. But it is. For a second, she looked like she might argue, but then something else slipped through. Something tired. Something vulnerable. She ran a hand through her hair, exhaling like the act itself cost her. You don't know everything. Then tell me, I said. Her eyes flicked to the door again, then to me. She seemed to weigh something invisible. My sister called earlier, she said finally. I blinked. The deflection surprised me. Okay, she wasn't just checking in. She was asking if I'd told you. That landed like a stone in my stomach. Told me what? Her throat moved in a swallow she didn't hide this time. About your mother. I stared at her, not understanding. What about her? She hesitated, then stepped closer, but not with intention. More like gravity failed her for a moment and she moved without thinking. Your mother thinks, she said slowly, that I am involved with someone. And she's half right. I felt the ground shift before I understood why. She looked up, and the truth was already written in her face before she spoke it. She thinks it's your uncle. The silence after that was sharp. What? I said, too calmly. She asked me about him last week, she continued, like she was forcing herself forward. Said she'd noticed he looks at me a certain way. Said she hoped I wasn't leading him on. I took that in, stunned. And you didn't correct her? She flinched, unbelievably small but real. What was I supposed to say? The truth. She didn't look away. You think she would have believed it? The answer sat heavy between us. You let her believe it, I said. It wasn't anger, just a new awareness. I didn't choose it, she said quietly. But I didn't fight it either. It was easier for her to think that, than to notice you. Heat rose in the room, not anger, but something tangled and raw. Does my uncle think that too? I asked. Yes. The word came out like it tasted bitter. He asked me if I'd consider going out with him. He thought your mother had mentioned it to me already. I absorbed that one blow at a time, the assumption, the lie, the way the truth had been shielded by something absurd. And you didn't say no, I said. She looked like she'd been caught in a confession she hadn't prepared for. I didn't say yes. Why didn't you shut it down? Because if I did, she said, her voice suddenly low and tight, someone would ask why. We lost eye contact then, not because we wanted to, but because both of us were suddenly too aware of the space we occupied. Too aware of the fact that what felt like a secret was now balanced on borrowed time. She moved past me, intending to leave for real, but when her arm brushed mine, she stopped. Didn't step back. Didn't apologize. That's why I can't, she started, but didn't finish. I turned to face her. She was close. Too close. Her breath touched my skin before her words did. If this comes out, she whispered, it won't just be about us. It'll destroy people who aren't even part of it. I didn't argue. I only said the one thing that didn't bend. I don't care what they think. She closed her eyes like that hurt. I wish I didn't. Then she opened them again. And something had changed, something that couldn't be undone. I told my sister it wasn't your uncle, she said. I exhaled, stunned. Then who does she think it is? She looked right at me. She didn't ask. Silence thickened. A new kind of danger. A new kind of clarity. Then, the decision that would tip everything. She reached for the door again. But instead of turning the handle, she locked it. The click of the lock felt louder than it should have been. She didn't turn around right away. Her hand stayed on the handle, fingers over the metal like she needed the cold of it to ground her. I watched the slow rise of her shoulders as she inhaled, then the tremor in her breath when she let it go. When she finally faced me, something in her expression had given up pretending. You don't get to misunderstand this, she said softly. I didn't move toward her. I didn't speak. I just waited, because for once, it looked like she was going to tell the truth without running from it. I have tried, she continued, voice low, steady only on the surface. I have tried to convince myself this is in your head, that you'll get over it, that it's one of those fleeting things you'll laugh about later. Her gaze dropped to the floor, then back up, and when it met mine, there was no shield left. But I'm the one who can't get over it. My pulse tripped. She noticed. I think about you, she said, like it cost her. More than I should. More than I've admitted. It scares me, because I know better. I know exactly what this could do to you, to me. She took a step toward me, then another, quiet, unsure but not stopping. I could feel the warmth of her before she was even close enough to touch. You make me feel like I'm standing somewhere I'm not supposed to be, she whispered. And I don't know if I'm terrified of falling, or of not jumping. I swallowed, but my voice didn't break when I answered. Then stop pretending you're not already on the edge. We were inches apart now. She looked at my mouth, just once, before pulling her eyes back to mine. If I do this, she breathed, I don't get to undo it. I'm not asking you to. Her fingers brushed my sleeve, light, uncertain, and then slid lower, stopping at my wrist. Her touch was barely there, but my heartbeat answered like she'd claimed every part of me. You don't know what you're choosing, she said. I do, I told her. I'm choosing you. Her breath caught. She didn't hide it this time. And if it ruins everything, she asked. Then let it. For a heartbeat, neither of us moved. The space between us throbbed with everything we hadn't said, everything we'd nearly said too late. Her forehead tilted toward mine, not touching, but close enough that her breath brushed my skin. One more breath. One more second of hesitation. Then she let her hand slide from my wrist to my chest. Her palm rested there, flat over my heartbeat, like she needed proof. Like she was taking it for herself. "I'm so scared of wanting you," she whispered. "You already do." Her eyes closed. When they opened again, the fight was gone, and the fear had changed shape. She didn't kiss me. I didn't close the space. But she didn't step back. And in that choice, quiet, trembling, undeniable, we both understood there was no going back now. Neither of us moved for a long time. Her hand stayed against my chest, like she wasn't sure whether to hold on or pull away. I could feel the warmth of her skin even through the fabric of my shirt. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It didn't feel dangerous. It felt like something had finally stopped fighting. She exhaled first. It wasn't dramatic, just a slow, quiet surrender of breath, the kind someone makes when they stop bracing for impact. "I don't know how this works," she said, not looking at me, her voice softer than it had been all night. "I don't know what it makes me, or you, or what people will say." I didn't interrupt. She wasn't asking for answers. "But I'm tired," she went on, "of acting like wanting you is some kind of mistake I haven't corrected yet." The words landed low, warm, like something finally honest. I covered her hand with mine. Not tight, just enough so she'd know I wasn't going anywhere unless she told me to. Her eyes flicked up to mine, and for the first time, she didn't look away. "I don't care what anyone thinks," I said quietly. "I care about you. That's it. That's all there is." It wasn't a speech. It wasn't poetry. It was bare and small and enough. She searched my face like she was waiting for a crack in the truth. When she didn't find one, her shoulders lowered just a little, the tension giving way to something shakier, relief, or fear letting go. Then she leaned in, slow, careful, and rested her forehead against mine. No kiss. No dramatic pull. Just that small point of contact that made the rest of the world feel uninvited. Her voice was barely there when she spoke. "I've spent years trying to be in control of everything. And you," she stopped, the corner of her mouth almost lifting, "you make me feel like I don't have to be." My thumb brushed the side of her hand, tracing a line along her skin. "Then don't." She let out something like a laugh, quiet and breathy, the kind people make when something hurts in a way they're willing to live with. We ended up sitting on the edge of the bed, not touching at first. The air felt different now. Not lighter, exactly, but settled. She was turned slightly toward me, elbows resting on her knees, hands folded loosely. "I was married once," she said, not dramatically, not offering a confession, just stating a fact. "A long time ago. It ended badly. I think I convinced myself that wanting something real again was dangerous." I nodded, not pushing for more. "And you," she said, glancing at me, "you're young. That scares me more than anything." "I'm not going to disappear," I said. "And I'm not some kid you have to protect from yourself." That made her look at me, really look. Whatever she saw there softened something in her posture. She shifted closer, the sides of our legs touching. "You make it sound simple," she murmured. "It is. Everyone else just complicates it." She huffed, barely a smile, but it stayed long enough to change the way her eyes held mine. I reached up and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. She didn't flinch or pull away. Instead, she leaned into the motion like her body had decided before her mind. Then, slow, cautious, her hand came to rest on my thigh. Just her fingertips at first, then her palm. Not claiming, not testing. Just being there. I laced my fingers through hers. She let me. For a while, we said nothing. She leaned her shoulder lightly against mine, and I turned my head just enough that my cheek brushed her temple. The closeness didn't feel stolen anymore. It felt chosen. She whispered, "This is real, isn't it?" "Yeah." And we're actually doing this. We already are. She closed her eyes and let her head rest fully against me. I pressed a small kiss to her hairline, not rushed, not greedy, just there. Her hand tightened around mine, not with fear, but something steadier. When she finally spoke again, it wasn't hesitant. "Stay," she said. "I will." We didn't need anything else that night, not declarations, not promises. Just the quiet, shared understanding that whatever came next, neither of us was pretending anymore. We sat there, fingers intertwined, her forehead eventually finding my shoulder, my arm wrapping around her like it had always belonged there. No more almosts. No more pulling back. Just us, finally still. And for the first time, the future didn't feel like something to run from.